The worst part about betrayal is how ordinary the room looks when your life breaks inside it. I remember the smell first. Tomato soup and motor oil. The soup was cooling inside the paper bag hooked around my wrist, while I climbed the narrow apartment stairs above Harbor Street Auto Repair. My feet hurt so badly I could feel my pulse in my arches. 14 hours in radiology. 2 emergency scans. 1 overdose patient. A little girl crying because she thought the MRI machine was going to swallow her whole. I was so tired I nearly fell asleep at a red light on the drive home. Outside, freezing rain tapped against the old Baltimore windows hard enough to sound like gravel. The radio station in my car kept fading in and out between weather warnings and late-night baseball scores. I remember thinking I needed to buy batteries for Mom's portable heater before another cold front hit. That was what my brain cared about 30 seconds before everything changed. I unlocked Declan's apartment with my copy of The Key and pushed the door open with my shoulder. The television was on low volume. Somebody had left the kitchen light burning. And my younger sister Ivy was sitting on the counter wearing my gray hoodie. Her bare legs swung slowly against the cabinet doors while Declan stood between her knees with his hands on her waist. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. The paper bag slipped a little in my grip. Warm soup soaking through the bottom seam onto my wrist. Declan looked at me first. Not guilty. Not angry. Just stunned in the way people look right before a car crash. Ivy climbed off the counter too fast, nearly knocking over an empty beer bottle beside the sink. "Marin, wait," she said, but her voice sounded thin and fake against the hum of the refrigerator. I stared at the hoodie instead. Mine. The sleeves still stretched at the cuffs because I always pushed them up while washing dishes. Little stupid details suddenly hurt more than the big ones. Declan took 1 step toward me. "It is not what you think." Funny how men always say that when they have already destroyed the part that mattered. I should have screamed, thrown something, asked questions. Instead I walked to the counter and carefully placed the soup down beside the stove because my mother still needed dinner, and I could not afford to waste $14 on takeout. The room felt painfully small. Declan smelled like cold air and diesel from the docks. Ivy smelled like my shampoo. Somewhere outside, a ship horn echoed through the harbor low and distant. "Marin." His voice cracked this time. Real panic underneath it. But I could not look at him anymore. Because the terrifying thing was not the possibility that he cheated. It was realizing how exhausted I already was before this happened. Too exhausted to fight for answers. Too exhausted to beg someone to love me correctly. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my apartment key, and set it beside the soup container. Declan's face changed instantly. Fear. Real fear this time. "Do not do this," he said quietly. I finally looked at him then. 6'3". Strong enough to scare half the port with a single stare. But standing there looking helpless in a kitchen with peeling paint and bad plumbing. "I am too tired for this tonight," I whispered. Then I walked out into the freezing rain wearing scrubs that still smelled like antiseptic and carrying absolutely nothing except the car keys in my hand. Behind me I heard Declan shout my name once. Only once. He did not follow me down the stairs. I drove around Baltimore for almost 3 hours before I realized I was still wearing my hospital badge around my neck. The photo clipped to it showed a version of me that suddenly felt embarrassing. Smiling. Rested. Hopeful enough to believe stability meant safety. Rain streaked across the windshield while the heater in my old Toyota blew cold air against my knees. I parked outside a 24-hour pharmacy near Dundalk around 2 in the morning because I could not stop shaking long enough to drive anymore. Not crying. Just shaking. Like my body had finally admitted something my brain had been trying not to know for months. Declan had been distant lately. Longer nights at the port. Falling asleep on the couch with work boots still on. Answering questions with one-word replies while staring at shipping manifests like they mattered. More than people. I kept telling myself he was stressed. Men like him carried pressure differently. That was the excuse I fed myself every night while reheating leftovers alone. Inside the pharmacy, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while an exhausted cashier stocked cough syrup in silence. I grabbed batteries for Mom's heater and tacids, and a pregnancy test I swore I did not need. My period had only been late because of stress. Double shifts. Exhaustion. Trauma. Betrayal probably messed with hormones too. At least that was what I told myself, standing in line, clutching the little white box face down so nobody could read it. The cashier barely looked up. Outside, freezing wind cut through my scrubs as I climbed back into the car. I took the test in the pharmacy bathroom because I suddenly could not bear the idea of bringing that possibility home with me. The stall door did not lock properly. Somebody kept coughing near the sinks. My hands trembled so badly I almost dropped the test into the toilet. 2 pink lines appeared before I even finished washing my hands. Fast. Immediate. Brutal. I stared at them while the bathroom fan rattled overhead. Pregnant. Declan's baby. For a second, the room tilted hard enough that I grabbed the sink to steady myself. I thought about calling him anyway. Thought about hearing his voice. About giving him one chance to explain what I saw. But then another memory surfaced instead. Ivy laughing in my hoodie. Declan's hands on her waist. That terrible silence when he realized he got caught. I folded the pregnancy test into layers of paper towel and shoved it deep into the trash can before anyone could see it. By the time I reached my apartment above Holloway Drugs, the sky was turning gray with early morning snow. Mom was asleep in her recliner beneath 3 blankets, oxygen machine humming softly beside her. The television flickered old game shows across the walls. I stood there watching her for a long moment before quietly replacing the batteries in her heater. She opened her eyes halfway. "You are home late," she murmured. "Busy night." My voice sounded strange to my own ears. "Empty." She squinted at me through exhaustion. "Mothers always know when something is wrong. Did you eat?" I looked toward the kitchen and suddenly remembered the soup still sitting on Declan's counter across town. "No, iwisparat. I do not think I can." Then my phone started vibrating in my pocket. Declan. Again. 6th missed call. I stared at his name lighting up the cracked screen while snow drifted quietly against the apartment windows. Mom fell back asleep before I finally turned the phone off completely. Declan showed up outside the hospital 3 days later looking like he had not slept once since I walked out of his apartment. I spotted his pickup near the employee entrance while leaving a 12-hour shift with a migraine pounding behind my eyes. Snow lined the sidewalks in dirty gray piles and the harbor wind sliced through my coat hard enough to make my chest ache. He leaned against the truck with both hands shoved into his jacket pockets, staring at the ground instead of the building. For one terrifying second, my body reacted before my anger did. Relief. Pure stupid relief. Then I remembered Ivy wearing my clothes. I kept walking. "Marin." His voice sounded rough like gravel dragged across concrete. I did not stop. He caught up beside me near the parking garage stairwell, boots crunching over salt and ice. "Please just let me explain." I laughed once under my breath because the word explain suddenly felt useless. Like trying to repair a flooded house with duct tape. You already did enough. Nothing happened. I finally stopped walking then, mostly because exhaustion hit me so hard my knees felt weak. "Do not insult me by pretending I imagined it." He ran one hand across his face hard enough to leave red marks on his skin. Close he looked terrible. Dark circles beneath bloodshot eyes. Stubble along his jaw. The kind of man who had been surviving on cigarettes and energy drinks for days. "I was drunk," he admitted quietly. "Nolan dragged me home after the funeral. Ivy came by later. I barely remember half of it. But you remember enough." Silence stretched between us while ambulances rolled past toward the emergency entrance. Somewhere overhead, a helicopter chopped through the freezing air. Toward the trauma wing. Baltimore never really slept. It just changed forms of suffering every few hours. Declan stared at me the way men stare at burning buildings they still think they can save. "I never touched her the way you think." I folded my arms tighter across my chest because suddenly I felt cold all the way into my bones. "You should have made sure there was nothing to misunderstand." That hit him harder than yelling would have. I saw it happen in real time. The guilt settling behind his eyes because he knew I was right. Declan had spent years fixing problems with money, intimidation, favors, silence. But relationships were different. They needed presence, attention, care. Things he never learned how to give consistently. He looked away toward the harbor skyline barely visible through the snow. "I know I have been gone lately." "Gone?" My voice cracked before I could stop it. "You lived 3 blocks away and still somehow disappeared." His jaw tightened. Things at the port got complicated. Things are always complicated, Declan. I was suddenly too tired for this conversation. Too tired for half-truths and emotionally unavailable men carrying invisible damage around like excuses. I reached for my car keys, but his voice stopped me again. Softer this time. I love you. That should have mattered more. Maybe months ago it would have. But love without safety starts feeling like another unpaid bill piling up on the kitchen counter. I looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him. The man who brought my mother groceries without being asked. The man who fixed my brakes last winter in freezing rain. The same man who could stand beside me every night and still somehow leave me emotionally alone. I do not think you know what love is supposed to feel like, I whispered. His face went completely still after that. Like I had reached inside him and touched the exact wound he spent his whole life hiding. I got into my car before he could answer. But as I pulled away, I saw him standing there in the rearview mirror with snow collecting across his shoulders, not moving at all. Morning sickness is a misleading name because mine lasted all day and tasted like metal. I threw up twice during a prenatal scan for another patient and had to lock myself inside the staff bathroom until the dizziness passed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while I sat on the closed toilet lid pressing paper towels against my mouth, trying to breathe quietly enough that nobody outside would hear me falling apart. My phone buzzed nonstop in my scrub pocket. Declan. Then Nolan. Then Declan again. I stopped checking the messages after the first 20. At home, things were getting worse in ways that had nothing to do with heartbreak. Mom's insurance denied coverage for a new lupus medication her doctor recommended. $700 a month out of pocket. I spent 2 hours arguing with a customer service representative, who kept calling me ma'am in that fake sympathetic voice people use, when they already know they are not helping you. By the end of the call, I was sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor surrounded by overdue pharmacy invoices while Mom slept in the next room coughing hard enough to rattle the walls. The pregnancy changed everything faster than I expected. Coffee made me nauseous. Long shifts made my back ache. I started calculating every dollar before spending it. Rent, utilities, medication, gas, prenatal appointments. There was no space left in my life for emotional disasters. Which was exactly why Declan terrified me now. Loving him had always felt a little like standing too close to train tracks. Exciting until you realized how easily something powerful could destroy your balance. 3 nights after he cornered me outside the hospital, someone knocked on the apartment door just after midnight. I already knew it was him before I looked through the peephole. Declan stood in the hallway holding 2 grocery bags in one hand and Mom's favorite lemon tea in the other. His face looked exhausted under the flickering hallway light. Your mother is out of tea, he said when I opened the door halfway. The pharmacy on Eastern was still open. I should have slammed the door. Instead, I stared at the bags while anger and exhaustion fought each other inside my chest. Declan had always loved through practical things. Groceries, repairs, quiet acts of service. It was the only language he trusted. You cannot keep showing up here. I know. He glanced toward the apartment behind me where the television murmured softly in the background. But I also know your heater barely works and June should not be carrying groceries down icy stairs. I hated that he noticed things like that. Hated that part of me still relaxed slightly around him because somewhere deep down my body remembered him as safe even when my heart no longer did. Mom appeared behind me wrapped in a blanket before I could answer. Declan, she said softly, surprised. He immediately straightened like a guilty teenager caught doing something wrong. Evening, June. Mom looked between us once and understood more than either of us said aloud. Sick people develop that skill. Reading tension. Reading silence. Bring the tea inside before it gets cold, she told him calmly, then disappeared back toward the recliner. I closed my eyes for one long second because suddenly fighting felt impossible. Declan stepped into the apartment quietly carrying the groceries like he had done 100 times before. He unpacked soup cans, medicine refills, bread, eggs. Domestic little movements that made my chest hurt worse than yelling would have. Neither of us spoke much. The radiator hissed unevenly beside the window while snow drifted against the fire escape outside. At one point, Declan reached automatically for the loose cabinet handle near the sink and tightened the screw with a pocket knife he carried everywhere. Tiny ordinary things. That was the dangerous part. Not passion. not anger. The dangerous part was how much he still looked like home. The first time I heard the words federal investigation connected to Declan's company, I was standing in the frozen foods aisle comparing prices on generic chicken soup. A local news report played softly from the television mounted above the pharmacy section near the registers. Something about port inspections, missing cargo manifests, several transportation businesses under review by federal authorities. I would have ignored it if the reporter had not mentioned Vail Logistics by name. My stomach dropped so hard I had to grip the shopping cart handle. Around me, people kept moving normally. A toddler cried near the cereal aisle. Somebody argued over coupons at customer service. But suddenly all I could think about was the baby growing inside me, and how fragile my entire future actually was. That night I sat at the kitchen table after Mom fell asleep, staring at unpaid bills while an infomercial flickered silently across the room. I opened my banking app 3 times in a row hoping the numbers would somehow change. They never did. I had less than $4,000 in savings. The apartment lease was month to month. My car needed new brakes. And now the man I once imagined building a family with might be dragged into something dangerous enough to end up on the evening news. My phone vibrated around midnight. Not Declan this time. Ivy. I almost ignored it. Almost. Marin. Her voice sounded raw, like she had been crying for hours. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. What do you want? Silence. Then a shaky breath. I messed everything up. Anger should have hit first. Instead, exhaustion did. Deep, heavy exhaustion that settled into my bones lately like winter itself. You already know that. Nothing happened between us. I laughed bitterly under my breath. That is not exactly comforting anymore. He pushed me away. Her words tumbled out fast now. He was drunk and angry after that funeral, and I thought. She stopped herself. Thought what? Thought maybe if somebody finally picked me instead of you, I would feel different about myself. That landed harder than I expected. Not because it excused her. It did not. But because suddenly I could see the ugly truth underneath everything. Ivy had spent her whole life standing beside me feeling smaller. Prettier boys liked me first. Teachers trusted me more. Mom leaned on me because I was responsible. And instead of becoming her enemy, I kept trying to save her from herself over and over until she finally destroyed the one thing I could not repair. You do not get to use your damage to justify mine, I said quietly. She started crying then. Real crying. Not manipulative. Not dramatic. Just broken. He has been losing his mind looking for you. My throat tightened instantly despite myself. That is not my problem anymore. He punched a hole through Nolan's garage wall yesterday. That sounded more like the old Declan people feared around the docks. The version I hated seeing. He stopped sleeping, Ivy whispered. And his dad got arrested again. I stared toward Mom's closed bedroom door while the radiator clicked unevenly beside the window. Somewhere downstairs, the pharmacy security gate rattled shut for the night. I cannot do this with you right now. Are you coming back? The question sat between us, breathing quietly. I touched my stomach without thinking. Tiny life. Tiny heartbeat. Tiny future depending entirely on me making the right choices now. No, I whispered finally. I am not. After I hung up, I sat alone in the kitchen listening to the old refrigerator hum while guilt and fear tangled together inside my chest so tightly, I could barely separate them anymore. Because for the first time since leaving Declan, I realized something terrifying. Loving someone dangerous is one thing. But carrying their child while the world around them starts collapsing feels like standing on train tracks, hearing something huge coming toward you in the dark. The first real scare happened on a Tuesday afternoon halfway through my shift. One second I was reviewing abdominal scans with another technician, and the next my vision blurred hard enough that I had to grab the edge of the counter to stay upright. Heat rushed through my body in waves. Somebody said my name from far away. Then everything tilted sideways. I woke up in an empty exam room with a blood pressure cuff squeezing my arm and my supervisor, Denise, standing beside the bed holding a clipboard against her chest. You pushed too hard, she said gently. Embarrassment hit me immediately. I hated needing help. Hated becoming another exhausted woman falling apart under fluorescent lights. I am fine. Denise gave me the kind of look older women say for younger ones who still think survival means pretending nothing hurts. You are pregnant and working 60-hour weeks while taking care of a sick parent. Fine is not the word I would use. I stared at the ceiling tiles instead of answering. The clinic air smelled faintly like antiseptic and microwaved soup from the break room down the hall. Denise sat beside the bed after a moment. You need support, Marin. The word support lodged somewhere painful in my chest because the truth was I had it once. Or at least I thought I did. Declan had never been soft in obvious ways. He was not flowers or poetry or emotional speeches. But when Mom's oxygen machine broke last summer, he replaced it before I even got home from work. When my car battery died outside the grocery store during a snowstorm, he drove 40 minutes across town just to fix it in freezing weather without complaining once. Loving him had always felt practical, solid, like somebody quietly reinforcing the floorboards beneath your feet, which somehow made what happened with Ivy hurt worse. Denise handed me a paper cup of water. You have someone at home? I hesitated too long. Her expression softened instantly with understanding. Listen to me carefully. Pride does not keep people alive, especially not pregnant women. After work, I stopped by the pharmacy downstairs to refill Mom's prescriptions and found a final notice taped to our mailbox. Past due electric bill. Disconnect warning. $93.14. I stood there in the dim hallway staring at the red letters while my feet throbbed inside my sneakers. $93 suddenly felt impossible. Upstairs, Mom was asleep in her recliner with an Afghan blanket pulled up to her chin. The television played an old cooking show to an empty room. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop to check my bank account again, even though I already knew the numbers. Then I noticed an envelope wedged beneath the sugar jar. No stamp. No name. Just my apartment number written in Declan's handwriting. My pulse jumped instantly. Inside was a folded receipt from the electric company, paid in full. I stared at it for a long time before realizing there was something else tucked underneath. A tiny handwritten note on the back of a Harbor Auto invoice. Your mother should not be cold. That was. No apology. No pressure. No declaration of love. Just one quiet sentence written in black ink. I should have been furious. Instead, tears burned suddenly behind my eyes so fast it caught me off guard completely. Because the horrible complicated truth was that Declan still knew exactly how to take care of people, even while failing at being emotionally honest with them. My phone buzzed beside the laptop an hour later. Unknown number. I almost ignored it until a voicemail notification appeared seconds later. Nolan's voice filled the kitchen when I pressed play. Marin, do not hang up on me. Declan got into trouble at the port tonight. Nothing life-threatening but bad enough. He would hate me for calling you. But somebody needs to know he has been running himself into the ground trying to hold everything together since you left. Silence crackled briefly through the speaker before Nolan spoke again, quieter this time. And for what it is worth, I was there that night with Ivy. He told her to leave. You walked in before she did. I told myself I was only going to the port because somebody could have died. That was the lie I repeated the entire drive across Baltimore, while my hands tightened around the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. The harbor looked different at night. Less cinematic. More tired. Floodlights cast pale yellow across stacks of shipping containers, while diesel engines rumbled somewhere deep in the maze of warehouses. Men in reflective jackets moved between trucks with their heads down against the cold. Everything smelled like salt water, metal and gasoline. Nolan met me outside a corrugated steel garage near Pier 12 with both hands shoved into his coat pockets. His expression changed the second he saw me. Relief first, then guilt. You should not be here, he muttered. Probably not. He studied my face for a second too long before glancing downward briefly toward my stomach. Not obvious enough for certainty, but enough to make my pulse jump. How bad is it? I asked quickly. Nolan exhaled hard through his nose. Bad enough. Inside the garage, fluorescent lights flickered over concrete stained black from years of oil and seawater. Declan sat shirtless on an overturned crate while a medic wrapped his ribs with fresh bandages. Bruising darkened one side of his torso and a shallow cut split his eyebrow. Nothing catastrophic. But he looked exhausted in a way I had never seen before. Not physically. Emotionally. like somebody holding a collapsing building upright with bare hands. His head snapped up the second I walked in. Shock crossed his face so fast it almost hurt to witness. Marin. The medic glanced awkwardly between us before quietly gathering supplies and leaving the garage without a word. Nolan followed after a moment too, giving us privacy neither of us knew how to handle anymore. Silence settled heavy between us, broken only by the distant groan of cargo cranes outside. Declan reached automatically for his discarded shirt, probably suddenly aware of the bruising, but winced halfway through the movement. I crossed the room before thinking and caught the fabric from his hands. The motion froze both of us instantly. Muscle memory. Habit. The old version of us still alive somewhere underneath the damage. You should be at home, he said quietly. According to Nolan, you nearly got yourself killed tonight. That is dramatic. Is it? I folded the shirt slowly just to keep my hands busy. Federal investigations. Violence at the docks. Men showing up injured in garages at midnight. You do not get to act like this is normal. His jaw tightened. I never wanted this life near you. But it is near me. The words landed harder than I intended because suddenly we were not talking about the port anymore. We were talking about everything. His choices. His silence. The chaos that always seemed to follow him home no matter how hard he tried separating the two worlds. Declan leaned back carefully against the crate, one hand pressed against his ribs. The fight tonight started because somebody skimmed money off a shipment. I stepped in before things escalated. I stared at him in disbelief. You realize normal people call the police for workplace disputes, right? A tired laugh escaped him unexpectedly. Small. Real. Yeah, I know. That laugh almost broke me more than the bruises did because it reminded me who he was underneath all the armor. A man raised around violence long enough that he genuinely forgot other people lived differently. My eyes drifted toward the battered pickup parked inside the garage bay. The passenger seat still held one of Mom's pharmacy bags from weeks ago. Declan followed my gaze and looked suddenly embarrassed. I forgot to bring it by. You kept driving around with her prescriptions in your truck? I kept thinking maybe you would answer the door. Something painful shifted quietly inside my chest then. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the sharp certainty that leaving him had consequences neither of us fully understood when I walked away. Declan looked exhausted. Older somehow. Like grief had worn grooves into him while I was busy trying to survive my own. He rubbed one hand across his face slowly before speaking again. You should not have come here tonight. I swallowed hard and finally admitted the truth neither of us could avoid anymore. I know. But I came anyway. The cramping started halfway home. First I thought it was stress. My hands shook on the steering wheel while traffic crawled past rows of shuttered seafood markets and dim laundromats near the harbor. Then another sharp pain hit low in my abdomen hard enough to steal my breath completely. I pulled into a gas station beside Route 40 and sat there gripping the steering wheel while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Panic arrived slowly, quietly. Worse than screaming panic because it felt rational. Clinical. I worked in medicine. I knew what severe cramping and dizziness could mean during pregnancy. My fingers fumbled for my phone before I even fully decided who I was calling. Declan answered on the first ring. Marin. His voice changed instantly hearing my breathing. What happened? I pressed one hand against my stomach and squeezed my eyes shut. I think something is wrong. He did not ask questions. Did not lecture. Did not hesitate. Where are you? 20 minutes later his pickup slid into the gas station lot so fast gravel snapped beneath the tires. He jumped out still wearing the same dark work jacket from the docks, one sleeve stained with dried blood near the cuff from earlier. The second he saw my face through the windshield, fear hit him so openly it almost scared me more than the pain itself. He opened the driver's side door and crouched immediately beside me. Talk to me. Cramping. Dizzy. Maybe bleeding. His jaw tightened hard enough to visibly pulse. Okay. The calmness in his voice sounded manufactured now. Built entirely for me. He helped me into the passenger seat carefully like I might break apart in his hands. During the drive to Mercy General, neither of us spoke much. The heater blasted unevenly while old rock music played softly from some local station buried beneath static. Declan drove one-handed. the other gripping the center console so tightly his knuckles stayed white the entire ride. Every red light seemed to make him angrier. At one intersection he hit the steering wheel once under his breath after waiting behind a city bus for too long. Declan. I know. His breathing sounded rough. I know. The emergency waiting room smelled like antiseptic and burnt vending machine popcorn. A toddler cried somewhere near reception while an exhausted nurse argued with somebody about insurance forms. Real life never pauses for personal disasters. That part always felt cruel to me. Declan stayed beside me through intake paperwork, through blood pressure checks, through the ultrasound room where cold gel spread across my stomach beneath harsh fluorescent lighting. The technician angled the monitor toward herself first. Standard procedure. But I saw the tiny flicker on the screen before she even spoke. Heartbeat. Strong. Relief hit so suddenly my eyes burned. Beside me, Declan sat completely motionless in the chair against the wall. The technician smiled softly. Everything looks okay. Stress can cause temporary cramping, but the baby is fine. The baby? Silence crashed into the room after that. The technician froze awkwardly, instantly realizing something important had just happened. I turned slowly toward Declan and watched the exact second the truth reached him fully. His face lost all color. Baby? He repeated quietly. I should have told him differently. Better. But exhaustion stripped away whatever careful plan I thought I still had left. I found out after I left. He stared at me like the floor beneath him had disappeared. One hand dragged slowly across his mouth while emotion moved visibly through him too fast to hide. Shock, fear, joy, grief, then guilt so sharp it almost looked physical. How far along? Almost 13 weeks. He leaned forward suddenly, elbows on his knees, both hands clasped tightly together like he was physically holding himself in place. For a long moment he said absolutely nothing. That scared me more than yelling would have. Finally he looked up at me, eyes red around the edges now. You were carrying my child while working double shifts and taking care of your mother alone? There was no anger in his voice, just devastation. The kind that comes when somebody realizes too late exactly how badly they failed someone they loved. I looked away first because suddenly I could not bear seeing his face anymore. I did what I had to do. Declan stood abruptly, then paced once across the tiny exam room before stopping near the sink. His breathing had changed again. Controlled too carefully. Dangerous only because of how hard he was trying not to fall apart. You should have told me. I did not trust you. That landed exactly where I knew it would. He closed his eyes briefly like the words physically hurt. When he opened them again, his voice dropped almost to a whisper. Yeah, he said quietly. I earned that. The ride back from the hospital felt worse somehow after the truth was finally out. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the part nobody talks about. Life-changing moments still happen under ugly parking lot lights and broken traffic signals, while somebody eats cold fries 3 cars over. Declan drove in complete silence with both hands tight on the wheel. I sat curled against the passenger door staring out at shuttered storefronts sliding past the window while exhaustion settled over me so heavily I could barely keep my eyes open. The baby was okay. That should have made everything simpler. Instead it made everything real. When we stopped outside my apartment building, neither of us moved right away. The dashboard clock glowed 1:17 a.m. in pale green numbers. Somewhere nearby a train horn echoed across the city. Declan finally cleared his throat. How long were you planning to keep this from me? I kept staring straight ahead. I do not know. That is not an answer. Irritation flickered beneath his exhaustion now. Not explosive anger. Worse, hurt trying to sound controlled. I turned toward him slowly. You do not get to question my decisions like we are some normal couple going through a rough patch. His jaw flexed instantly. I am the father. And you were also the reason I spent the first trimester terrified and alone. Silence slammed into the truck hard enough to feel physical. Declan looked away first, breathing once through his nose like he was forcing himself not to react defensively. That alone told me how badly this was affecting him because the old Declan hated feeling cornered emotionally. I know I failed you, he said quietly, but shutting me out completely protected me. My voice cracked sharper than I intended. Do you understand what it felt like standing in that bathroom staring at a positive pregnancy test after seeing you with my sister? He closed his eyes briefly. I kept going anyway because months of swallowed pain suddenly had somewhere to land now. Every time my phone rang after that, I wondered whether I was about to hear your name on the news. Every prenatal appointment, every bill, every night Mom got sick, I handled alone because trusting you felt more dangerous than struggling by myself. Declan's hands loosened from the steering wheel slowly. You think I would have abandoned you? I think I already felt abandoned before I left. That hit him hardest of all because it was true. Not one dramatic betrayal. Hundreds of smaller absences stacked quietly over time. Missed dinners. Half-listened conversations. Emotional distance disguised as stress and work and exhaustion until eventually I stopped expecting comfort from him at all. Declan leaned back against the seat heavily, staring through the windshield toward the apartment building. I do not know how to fix this. There it was. The real problem underneath everything. He genuinely did not know how. Men like Declan grew up surviving chaos, not communicating through it. He knew how to intimidate dockworkers twice his size. How to move freight through blizzards. How to repair engines with frozen hands at 3 in the morning. But emotional repair required vulnerability, patience, consistency. Things nobody ever taught him. You cannot fix it overnight, I said finally, quieter now because I was tired of yelling too. That is the problem. He nodded once slowly like each word weighed something inside him down further. I reached for the door handle. Marin. I paused without looking at him. I am happy about the baby. My throat tightened painfully. You do not have to say that because you feel guilty. I am saying it because it is true. His voice sounded rough again. Honest this time. And because I already love something I have not even seen yet. Tears burned suddenly behind my eyes and I hated that they did because emotions felt dangerous around him now. Dangerous because part of me still wanted to believe him. I opened the truck door quickly before he could see my face properly. Good night, Declan. Can I come to appointments? The question stopped me halfway out of the truck. Small question. Careful question. Not demanding rights. Asking permission. I stared at the cracked pavement beneath my shoes for a long moment while cold wind moved through the alley behind the building. I do not know yet, I whispered honestly. Then I walked upstairs alone while Declan stayed parked outside for almost another hour beneath the flickering streetlight. Declan stopped trying to force conversations after that night. No surprise visits waiting outside the hospital. No midnight apologies. No dramatic promises about changing. Instead, he started doing quiet practical things that were almost harder to defend myself against. 2 days after the hospital scare, I came home from work and found the apartment stair railing repaired. The loose metal bar that had wobbled dangerously for months no longer shifted beneath my hand. No note. No announcement. Just fixed. A week later, somebody replaced the burned-out hallway light outside our apartment door. Then the pharmacy delivery truck that always struggled to start during cold mornings suddenly had a new battery installed before dawn. Mom noticed first, of course. She sat in her recliner watching Declan through the window one afternoon while he shoveled snow away from the pharmacy entrance without saying a word to anyone. That man looks tired, she murmured softly. Tired did not even begin covering it anymore. Declan had dark circles permanently carved beneath his eyes now. He lost weight. His clothes hung differently across his shoulders. But every few days he still showed up somewhere quietly repairing pieces of our life without asking for credit. First it made me angry, then uncomfortable, then something worse. Grateful. The pregnancy kept moving forward whether my emotions were ready or not. At 18 weeks, my scrub stopped fitting properly around my waist. Denise started forcing me to take actual lunch breaks instead of eating crackers between patients. Mom's health kept fluctuating unpredictably. Some days she cooked soup and folded laundry like nothing was wrong. Other days she could barely walk from the recliner to the bathroom without needing to rest halfway there. One Thursday morning, I came downstairs before work and found Declan asleep in a chair behind the pharmacy counter. The old radio beside him crackled low with morning weather reports while paperwork lay scattered across the desk. He looked uncomfortable folded into the tiny wooden chair. One arm crossed over his chest, work boots still on. For a second I just stood there staring because the sight made no sense. Then Harold Jenkins shuffled out from the storage room carrying inventory sheets. Harold had owned the pharmacy downstairs for almost 30 years before arthritis forced him into partial retirement. "Morning," he whispered, noticing my confusion immediately. "Truck delivery came late last night. Your mother could not lift the boxes anymore. Boy stayed until 2 helping me unload inventory." I looked back at Declan sleeping beneath the fluorescent lights. There was cardboard dust on his jacket sleeve and grease smudged near one cuff. Real work. Ordinary work. Harold shrugged one shoulder. Did not say much. Just asked where the gloves were and started carrying boxes. Something twisted painfully in my chest because this was exactly who Declan had always been underneath everything else. Not verbally affectionate. Not emotionally skilled. But relentless when it came to responsibility once he decided someone belonged to him. The dangerous part was how easy it would be to mistake effort for healing. Around noon that same day, my obstetrician called with concerning blood work results. Elevated stress markers. Mild anemia. Early signs I needed to reduce physical strain before complications developed. "You need rest," Dr. Feldman said firmly through the phone. "And support." I almost laughed at that word again. By evening, I sat at the kitchen table sorting medical bills while trying not to panic about maternity leave I could not afford. Mom was asleep. The apartment smelled faintly like heating dust and canned tomato soup. A soft knock sounded at the door around 8. Declan stood outside holding a folded piece of paper and a small plastic grocery bag. "What is this?" I asked carefully. "Schedule." He handed over the paper. Typed neatly across it were dates and times. Prenatal appointments. Mom's infusion treatments. Pharmacy supply deliveries. My work shifts. Beside each one, Declan had written where he could cover transportation, groceries, repairs, or errands around his port schedule. Structured. Practical. Almost painfully serious. I stared at the page silently while he shifted awkwardly beneath the hallway light. "You made a calendar?" Nolan's ex-wife said pregnant women like organization. The sincerity in his voice nearly broke me. Then he held up the grocery bag slightly. "Also, Denise told me you keep forgetting to eat lunch." Inside were crackers, ginger candies, bottled water, and prenatal vitamins from the pharmacy downstairs. Tiny ordinary things. Not romance. Not forgiveness. Just effort repeated consistently enough to slowly become visible. By the 7th month of pregnancy, my body no longer let me pretend I could carry everything alone. My ankles swelled during double shifts. My lower back ached constantly. Sometimes I became so tired halfway through scanning patients that I had to sit quietly in supply closets for 5 minutes just to stop the room from spinning. Declan noticed every single change without pointing any of them out directly. That was his pattern now. Observation instead of pressure. One Saturday morning I came downstairs late after finally sleeping more than 4 consecutive hours, and found him in the pharmacy aisle arguing softly with Harold about baby thermometers. "The digital ones break too easy," Harold insisted. "That is because people buy cheap ones," Declan replied while reading packaging with the seriousness of a man reviewing shipping contracts. I stood there unnoticed for almost a full minute watching them. The sight felt strangely unreal. Declan Vale, feared by half the dockworkers in Baltimore, debating infant medicine beside a display of cough drops and reading glasses. Then he looked up and spotted me. Something immediately softened in his face before he caught himself. Not dramatic happiness. Just instinctive warmth. Dangerous warmth. "You should be sitting," he said automatically. Irritation flared fast enough to surprise both of us. "I am pregnant, not dying." His expression shut down slightly at my tone. There it was again. The damage neither of us fully knew how to navigate. Even now, with all his effort, I still reacted like closeness might cost me something eventually. Declan stepped back immediately. "Right. Saudi." Guilt followed almost instantly because the truth was he had not actually done anything wrong this time. But fear changes people in ugly small ways. It makes kindness feel suspicious. Mom noticed the tension too while eating soup upstairs later that afternoon. "You snap at him whenever he starts getting close again," she said calmly. "Because getting close again is terrifying." She nodded slowly like she understood more than I wanted her to. "That man has spent months trying to rebuild trust one grocery bag at a time." I stared down into my bowl. And some days I still remember Ivy sitting in my hoodie. Mom sighed softly. Healing is not loyalty to pain, sweetheart. I wanted to argue with her. Instead, I changed the subject and helped sort her medication organizer for the week. 3 nights later, I woke around 2 in the morning with sharp pressure low in my abdomen and immediate panic clawing through my chest. Not pain exactly. Tightness. Strange, unfamiliar tightening that came and went in waves. I sat frozen on the edge of the bed, timing contractions on my phone, while my heartbeat pounded so hard I could hear blood rushing in my ears. Braxton Hicks, probably. False labor. Still terrifying. My hands shook reaching for the phone beside my pillow because there was only one person I wanted in that moment, even after everything. Declan answered, sounding half asleep and instantly alert at the same time. Marin. I think something is wrong again. 10 minutes later he was upstairs barefoot beneath an old flannel jacket, hair still messy from sleep, carrying a plastic grocery bag filled with water bottles, crackers, and the prenatal binder Denise made for me months ago. He stopped short the second he saw my face. Hospital. I do not know. The honesty in my voice scared me more than the contractions themselves. Declan crouched carefully in front of the couch where I sat, gripping a heating pad against my stomach. Talk me through what you are feeling. I tried. He listened without interrupting while timing contractions on his phone with the same focused intensity he used repairing engines. Calm. Methodical. Reliable. After an hour the pressure eased slowly. False alarm. Stress and exhaustion according to the on-call nurse hotline. Relief left me shaky and embarrassed. Sorry, I whispered eventually. You do not apologize for needing help. The words came immediately this time. Natural. Like he had been carrying them around waiting for the right moment to say them. I looked at him sitting cross-legged on my worn apartment carpet at 3 in the morning wearing mismatched socks and holding pregnancy paperwork in giant calloused hands. Not fixed. Not redeemed completely. Still emotionally awkward. Still carrying too much darkness around the edges of his life. But trying. God, he was trying. And somehow that almost scared me more than when he was failing. The nursery started by accident. Neither of us actually called it that at first. It was just the storage room beside Mom's bedroom where old pharmacy inventory and broken folding chairs collected dust for years. One afternoon I came home from work early because my feet were swollen so badly Denise practically shoved me out of the clinic, and I found Declan sitting cross-legged on the floor surrounded by half-assembled shelves and instruction manuals spread everywhere. A tiny screwdriver hung from the corner of his mouth while he squinted angrily at a diagram upside down in his hands. I stood in the doorway trying not to laugh. You realize normal people watch tutorial videos for this? Declan glanced up immediately. His expression softened when he saw me before irritation returned toward the shelf pieces. These instructions were clearly written by somebody who hates families. The room smelled faintly like fresh paint and sawdust. Sunlight pushed through the dusty window overlooking the alley, while an old Orioles game murmured softly from the portable radio beside him. Ordinary afternoon. Ordinary moment. Somehow those were the ones affecting me most lately. Not grand gestures. Not emotional speeches. Just watching him choose to stay present over and over again even when nobody forced him to. I stepped carefully around cardboard boxes and lowered myself onto the floor beside him with a tired groan. Move over. You should not be sitting on the floor. I gave him a look. He raised both hands immediately in surrender. Right. Sorry. Forget I said it. That made me smile despite myself. Small progress. Months ago he would have doubled down defensively. Now he caught himself. Learned. Adjusted. It mattered more than he probably realized. We spent the next hour assembling furniture badly together. Declan held pieces steady while I read instructions aloud. At one point he dropped an entire bag of screws across the floor and muttered something under his breath that made me laugh hard enough my stomach tightened painfully around the baby. He froze instantly. You okay? The baby is fine. I rested one hand against my stomach, still smiling. He just apparently hates your carpentry skills. Declan stared at my hand for one quiet second before looking away too quickly. Fear still lived inside him too. I understood that now. Not fear of fatherhood exactly. Fear of loving something enough to lose it. Around sunset, Mom shuffled into the doorway wrapped in her robe carrying 3 grilled cheese sandwiches on paper plates. "You two make more noise than construction workers," she complained gently. Declan stood automatically to take the plates from her before she could drop them. The movement was so instinctive neither of them even noticed anymore. Family built slowly sometimes. Through habits. Through repetition. Through people choosing each other during boring ordinary evenings. We ate sitting on the floor surrounded by unfinished furniture, while the radio crackled baseball scores and traffic reports into the room. Halfway through dinner, the baby kicked hard enough to visibly move beneath my shirt. I inhaled sharply in surprise. Declan went completely still beside me. Did he just? Yeah. Silence settled softly around us. Not awkward this time. Just full. I hesitated only a second before reaching for his wrist and placing his hand carefully against my stomach. Declan's entire body tensed beneath the contact like he could not believe I was allowing this. Another kick landed directly beneath his palm. His breathing stopped completely. I watched emotion move across his face too fast for him to hide any of it. Wonder. Fear. Love so immediate it almost looked painful. His eyes lifted slowly to mine and for the first time in months, neither of us looked away. No ownership. No demands. No pretending the past disappeared. Just 2 exhausted imperfect people sitting on a dusty floor realizing they still had a choice about what came next. Declan swallowed hard before speaking quietly. "I do not need you to forgive me tonight." His thumb brushed once lightly against my stomach. "I just appreciate being here for this." Something inside my chest loosened then. Not fully healed. Maybe never fully healed. But softer around the edges now. Softer because for once he was not trying to possess love. He was simply asking to participate in it. Rowan arrived during the first snowstorm of December after 21 exhausting hours of labor, and one very emotional nurse threatening to throw Declan out of the delivery room for pacing too much. Nothing about childbirth felt cinematic. It was sweat and fear and fluorescent lights and crushed ice melting in paper cups beside hospital monitors. My back felt like it was splitting apart. Declan looked more terrified than any man I had ever seen in my life. At one point during transition, I screamed at him for breathing too loudly, and he immediately apologized like he had committed an actual crime. The nurse laughed so hard she had to step out of the room. By the time Rowan finally cried for the first time just after 3 in the morning, both of us looked completely wrecked. Declan stood frozen beside the hospital bed, while the nurse placed our son carefully into his arms. 6'3". Bruised ribs still healing beneath his sweater. Hands rough from years at the docks. And holding a 7-pound baby like the world had suddenly become breakable. I watched his face change slowly while Rowan blinked up at him sleepily beneath the striped hospital blanket. Fear first. Then disbelief. Then something softer than I had ever seen from him before. "Hey buddy," he whispered hoarsely. His voice cracked completely on the last word. 3 months later, life still was not easy. Mom's health continued declining in slow, unfair ways. Rowan screamed through most nights with colic. The pharmacy barely stayed profitable enough to cover bills. Declan still worked brutal hours at the port while trying to untangle himself from dangerous business connections piece by piece. Sometimes he came home exhausted and emotionally shut down again. Sometimes I still flinched internally when his phone rang too late at night. Healing turned out to be less like forgiveness, and more like rebuilding a house after water damage. Slow. Repetitive. Invisible to outsiders. But different things were true now too. Declan learned how to warm bottles at 3 in the morning while half asleep. He kept extra diapers in his truck after getting stranded once during a traffic accident with a screaming newborn in the back seat. Every Thursday he drove Mom to infusion appointments because he knew hospitals made me anxious now after working there all week. He still struggled talking about emotions directly, but he started saying practical truths instead. Drive safe. Text me when you get there. I already picked up the prescription. Did you eat today? And somehow those small sentences began feeling more trustworthy than grand declarations ever had. One freezing evening near the end of February, I came downstairs after finally getting Rowan asleep and found Declan sitting alone behind the pharmacy counter repairing the old portable radio Mom loved. The station crackled softly between static and jazz while snow drifted outside the front windows. He looked up when I entered, Tired lines deep around his eyes now, but softer somehow too. Less guarded. "I think I fixed it," he said quietly. The radio suddenly cleared enough for an old Frank Sinatra song to drift through the shop. Warm. Worn out. Familiar. I leaned against the counter watching him carefully rewind electrical tape around one final wire connection. Months ago, I would have mistaken moments like this for evidence everything was magically healed now. But real love looked different after surviving disappointment. Real love looked like two flawed people continuing to choose honesty after learning how easily silence can ruin everything. "You know," I said softly, "there was a time I thought leaving you was the only way to protect myself." Declan nodded once without arguing. Maybe it was. That answer mattered more than he realized because old Declan would have fought to rewrite history into something cleaner. This version understood pain could still be real even if love survived it. Rowan started crying upstairs through the baby monitor clipped to my sweater. Declan stood automatically. I got him. He disappeared toward the stairs while I stayed behind the counter listening to his heavy footsteps move through the apartment above us. A minute later, the crying quieted. Through the ceiling, I heard his low, tired voice murmuring nonsense comfort to our son while the repaired radio played softly beside me in the empty pharmacy. And for the first time in a very long time, home no longer felt like something fragile waiting to collapse. It felt like something being built. Slowly. Imperfectly. On purpose. Before you go, if this story touched something in your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who still believes love can heal even the darkest parts of us. Every view, every comment, every share helps this channel continue creating cinematic stories about redemption, loyalty, and the kind of love that stays when life becomes difficult. And tell us in the comments, do you think trust can truly be rebuilt after betrayal? Thank you for being here tonight. See you in the next story.